Tonight we open a chamber door to a world both familiar and strange. The air carries the faint scent of wax and linen, and the light trembles across carved oak and woven tapestries. A nobleman sleeps, not stretched across the bed, but seated upright, his chin gently bowed and his posture noble even in dreams. He looks less like a man at rest, and more like a portrait waiting to be admired. Before we begin, if you enjoy these quiet walks through history, calm journeys into how people truly lived and slept, I'd love to have you along for more. A gentle tap on subscribe helps a small channel like ours grow, and it lets me know you're enjoying these peaceful explorations of the past. Now then, for centuries, this was the proper way to sleep if you were important enough to own a bed that could double as a balcony. To lie flat was considered improper, even dangerous. Doctors warned that the body's four humours, blood, phlegm, yellow bile and black bile, might drift to the wrong places when you lay horizontal. Sit up, they advised, and your health would remain as balanced as your decorum. And so the medieval elite slept like statues. Propped by pillows wrapped in layers of linen and velvet, they spent the night suspended between luxury and mild discomfort. A true noble could make even rest an act of discipline, but medicine was only half the story. Superstition filled the rest of the room. To lie flat was to mimic death. To sit was to declare oneself alive and alert to heaven. A flat sleeper invited spirits to press upon his chest, an upright sleeper told them politely to find someone less important. The church approved. Writers called it the Christian posture of repose. Sleeping half upright suggested modesty and readiness for prayer. It also showed off the bed curtains you'd paid so dearly for. Beds were status symbols as much as sanctuaries. The higher the bed, the closer you were to God, and further from rats. Great canopies rose toward the rafters, heavy with carved wood and embroidered family crests. Servants needed steps to reach them, and sometimes a plan to get back down. Each night unfolded like a ceremony. Candles were lit, wine was poured, and layers of fabric were arranged with mathematical precision. There was a right order for everything, from boots to blessings. A bed was not just for sleep, it was a theatre of manners. The castle quieted. Outside, hooves echoed on stone. Inside, the noble sat half upright, half dreaming, waiting for the night to choose a story. Sleep rarely came easily. The world after dark was alive with creaks and whispers. Wind slipped through the shutters. Dogs argued with ghosts no one could see. Those who believed in spirits left a candle burning. Those who didn't left two, just in case. Prayers were muttered to ward off demons and nightmares. Small relics were tucked under pillows, a splinter of saint, a feather, a cross carved from olive wood. If the dreams were kind, the relic earned credit. If they weren't, the servant earned blame. Herbs hung from the rafters to cleanse the air. Lavender for peace, rosemary for memory, and something called feverfew for everything else. The room smelled like a botanist had quarrelled with a bakery. Around midnight, servants made their rounds. One checked the fire, another the windows, a third the breathing of the master. A still chamber was reassuring, a silent one was not. In the quiet, the servants sometimes whispered prayers of their own, not for their lord's soul, but for an uneventful shift. Some households slept in numbers that would shock a modern fire marshal. Beds were shared not for love but for warmth. Even the wealthy kept servants in their rooms at night. It was a mark of prestige to have someone awake while you pretended not to be. The poor huddled on the floor with family and livestock. The rich did it on purpose and called it tradition. Everyone agreed it was better than being alone with the dark. By the small hours, our noble's bed resembles a fortress of pillows and superstition. Somewhere beneath the fabric he shifts, muttering about drafts and duty. He will wake stiff-necked but satisfied, certain that he has slept both safely and fashionably. Outside, the wind turns toward morning. The candles have burned to puddles of wax. The house smells of smoke and dreams. In the courtyard, the first stable boy stirs the coals for the day's work. And in the great bedchamber, our noble remains half awake, half asleep, balanced perfectly between comfort and custom, as the Middle Ages preferred it. Morning arrives quietly in the manor. The grey before dawn glows faintly through the shutters, and the air smells of ashes and wool. Servants whisper in the corridor, careful not to wake their masters before the bell, though the roosters outside have already ruined the illusion of silence. Somewhere below, the kitchen fire coughs itself awake, and bread dough remembers it has work to do. Our noble will rise soon, but not yet. He has a ritual to maintain. Sleep is not ended by waking. It is dismissed like a loyal servant. First, the curtains are drawn back to let in a line of cold light. Then the chamberlain clears his throat, a polite signal that the world has resumed its duties. The noble opens one eye, studies the ceiling, and performs the morning's first act of discipline, pretending he is not uncomfortable. Water waits in a brass basin, its surface trembling in the draught. A servant kneels, paws, and steps back as if the motion were sacred. To bathe is a negotiation between cleanliness and caution. Water is useful, but everyone knows it invites sickness if abused. So instead of submersion, the noble dabs at his face and hands with linen, scented in rose water or vinegar. Soap, when used, is made from animal fat and lye, harsh enough to clean a knight's conscience. Once the washing is done, layers begin. A noble's clothing is not an outfit, but an architecture. Linen shirt, hose, doublet, tunic, belt, gown. Each piece fastens the next like paragraphs in a sermon. To be properly dressed is to demonstrate mastery over time itself, because each garment requires someone else's hands. A servant laces sleeves, another ties boots, a third smooths wrinkles. The master will create again within minutes. While this unfolds, a small boy hovers near the fire, heating wine in a cup of pewter. Breakfast, if one can call it that, is modest. Bread, cheese, and a swallow of spiced wine to warm the humours. The church frowns upon gluttony before Mass, so nobles sip rather than feast. Hunger is postponed until virtue has been observed. By the time the chapel bell rings, the manor smells of smoke, perfume, and faint anxiety. Prayer is less about faith than formality. Everyone kneels in careful unison. Each movement must appear effortless. A noble's voice in prayer is measured, not too loud to seem proud, not too soft to seem absent. Even devotion has etiquette. After prayers comes business. Petitioners gather in the great hall, their boots tracking the countryside onto imported rugs. They bring disputes, requests, and gossip disguised as duty. The noble listens from his chair like a small king beneath the larger shadow of one. He dispenses judgment, advice, and occasionally wine. Justice in this age often depends on who speaks last. The hall brightens as the morning ripens. Light flickers off armour, polished to blindness. The tapestries catch every whisper of the breeze. Somewhere a hound sneezes, and for a moment everyone forgets to be solemn. Then the steward coughs discreetly, and dignity returns. When the business wanes, leisure takes its place. To be idle is forbidden, but to be seen being idle is an art. Reading is fashionable now, at least pretending to. A clerk reads aloud from a Latin text while the noble nods at intervals that suggest understanding. If the words drift into French poetry or hunting tales, no one complains. Learning is like perfume. Its purpose is to be noticed, not consumed. Midday announces itself with the clang of a bell and the smell of roasted meat. Lunch is the day's true indulgence. Tables are lined with trenchers of bread that double as plates. By the meal's end, they are soaked through and destined for the servants. Salt gleams like treasure. Spices are paraded like trophies from distant lands. The noble eats deliberately, hands washed in scented water, knife held daintily, conversation flowing between sips of wine. It is less a meal than a social performance with crumbs. After dining, fatigue settles in like polite company that refuses to leave. The noble retires briefly to his chamber for what the French call a short rest, though short is a flexible term. He may read letters, dictate notes, or stare at the ceiling and reconsider philosophy. Servants move quietly through the room, resetting the scene for evening as though life were a play performed twice a day. Later comes the outdoor hour, hunting if the weather allows, falconry if the birds cooperate, chess if neither does. These are not hobbies, they are declarations of breeding. Each pursuit carries the weight of lineage and the risk of embarrassment. To miss one's mark with a bow is forgivable, to look clumsy while missing is not. By the time the sun begins to think about surrendering, the manor exhales. Fires are stoked, candles trimmed, and the smell of supper creeps from the kitchens like a rumour. Children of the household are bathed and silenced. Guests reappear with stories rehearsed to sound spontaneous. Laughter drifts up the stairwells, mingling with the crackle of pitchwood and the scrape of lutes. As the evening meal approaches, etiquette sharpens once more. Knives are polished, napkins folded with military precision, and the host rehearses his patience. Every dinner is a negotiation between appetite and reputation. To eat too quickly is vulgar, to eat too little is suspicious. Conversation must sparkle but never ignite, and when the final plate is cleared, when candles lean low and talk becomes soft enough for secrets, the noble retires again to that monumental bed. The day closes as it began, with ceremony, with servants, with the illusion of control. Outside, the countryside cools beneath a quilt of fog. Inside, our noble breathes the faint scent of rosemary and smoke and wonders perhaps whether heaven smells the same. Evening descends not with darkness but with ceremony. The sky bruises from gold to violet, and the castle exhales the day's last breath of heat. Servants hurry through corridors carrying trays of candles like migrating stars. Each flame is touched to another, until the manor glows with borrowed daylight. Our noble stands by the window, watching the courtyard shrink into shadow. He can smell the stables from here, not unpleasantly but as proof of life beyond velvet. The wind nudges the curtains, curious and cold somewhere. The chapel bell tolls the hour of vespers, soft as a warning. Dinner has ended. The theatre of manners is complete. Now begins the quieter pageant of reputation. Guests withdraw to chambers or gather in the solar, a high room warm with laughter and ambition. Lutes tune themselves badly. Goblets refill without invitation. The noble listens to talk of hunting, of politics, of who has fallen from favour this week. Every word is weighed like coin. At the far end of the room, A storyteller takes his place beside the hearth. His trade is older than the walls themselves. He tells of saints who wrestled demons, of kings who rose from dreams, of peasants who outwitted devils armed only with wit and hunger. The audience leans forward, caught between reverence and disbelief. Stories, after all, are the only luxury that multiplies when shared. When the tale ends, applause is replaced by the hush of digestion and thought. The noble excuses himself, citing fatigue, though what he truly seeks is solace. He climbs the winding stair with one hand on the wall, the stones still warm from the day. Torches sputter in their brackets, tracing halos of smoke on the ceiling. Halfway up, he pauses, listening. Below, laughter continues. Above, the corridor hums with draughts and the small sounds of servants preparing rooms for sleep. His chamber awaits, restored to order by invisible hands. Fresh sheets, scented with lavender and heat, wait beneath a canopy heavy as a crown. A single candle burns beside the bed, its flame bending in the draught like a tired dancer. The air is thick with the perfume of beeswax and damp wool. On the table lies a small book, bound in leather and gilt. He opens it carefully. The pages whisper secrets of devotion and discipline. He mouths a prayer but does not finish it. Not out of rebellion, but habit. He has said it too many times to expect an answer. From somewhere distant comes a muffled bark, a hinge complaining, the faint metallic cough of a guard shifting his armour. The world is winding itself tight for the night. He sits by the fire for a while, the orange light cutting deep lines across his face. On the mantel stands a small wooden cross, half hidden behind a bowl of dried herbs. Faith and fragrance share the same shelf. Both are meant to keep bad spirits away. He thinks of the stories told downstairs, the demons, the miracles, and smiles to himself. For all his titles and trappings, he still fears what he cannot see. That fear is the only thing the poor and the powerful truly share. A servant enters quietly, carrying a jug of water and a look of exhaustion. He sets the jug down, bows, and murmurs that the doors are locked, the dogs chained, the fires banked. The noble thanks him with the smallest nod, gratitude expressed as permission to leave. When the door closes, the silence is complete enough to be heard. He removes his rings one by one, laying them on the table like tiny promises. The robe follows, then the shoes, until he is dressed only in fatigue. He sits upon the edge of the bed and stares at the candle, until the flame becomes a memory. The air moves, but he does not. He is thinking of nothing, which is to say he is thinking of everything. Outside, the courtyard drips with dew. A horse stamps in its stall. An owl rehearses its question to the moon. From the chapel, a last thread of incense escapes through the window, rising toward whatever listens. He lies back, not flat, never flat, but reclined just enough to remind the heavens he is still among the living. The pillow cradles his shoulders like a loyal witness. The sheets murmur against his skin, promising warmth if not peace. Sleep comes reluctantly, like a guest uncertain of welcome. In that narrow country between waking and dream, the noble walks through corridors that no longer exist. He hears footsteps that may be his own, doors that open to other centuries. A voice calls his name, softly, respectfully, as though the past itself requires permission to speak. When morning returns, no one will remember these dreams. The servants will light the fire, the bell will ring, and the world will resume its measured heartbeat. But for now, in this handle-lit moment suspended between faith and fatigue, the Middle Ages exhale one long sigh, and rest. The medieval world was a physician's dream and a patient's nightmare. Every ache carried a story, and every story demanded a cure that was equal parts faith and guesswork. In the Middle Ages, medicine was not a science, but an adventure, a blend of prayer, herbs and optimism strong enough to frighten modern doctors. A noble waking with a headache might summon his household healer. The man arrived in wool robes, carrying a wooden chest of tools that looked better suited to carpentry than care. First came observation, the colour of the face, the smell of the breath, the texture of the tongue, even the mood of the patient's dog. Then came the verdict, an imbalance of humours. The cure released the offending humour before it caused mischief. That usually meant bloodletting, a ritual so common that leeches were practically family pets. In medieval England, barbers doubled as surgeons. Their red and white poles were not decoration. They were warnings, red for blood, white for bandages, and the pole itself for gripping, while you tried not to faint. If you were wealthy, your blood was taken with ceremony. If you were poor, it was taken with enthusiasm. Other treatments were less painful, but more imaginative. To treat toothache, a monk in candlelight whispered a Latin prayer into your mouth, then touched it with wax melted from a church candle. For fevers, doctors prescribed ground pearls or powdered emeralds, luxury reduced to dust. For melancholy, they suggested roasted hedgehog, or the smoke of burnt orange peel, whichever was easier to catch. Even sneezing was seen as dangerous. A medieval doctor might bless you mid-sneeze to keep your soul from escaping out your nose. The medieval mind saw no boundary between body and soul. A cough might mean a chill or divine disapproval. So cures came in pairs, one for the flesh and one for the spirit. A tonic for the stomach was swallowed with a prayer for forgiveness. Both were expected to help. In the stone streets of medieval cities, apothecaries mixed potions in shops that smelled of honey, vinegar, and despair. Their shelves glittered with glass jars labelled in Latin, though few could read them. Inside were marvels, dried herbs, crushed coral, bones wrapped in silk, and something called Mummia, a black powder scraped from imported mummies, believed to cure everything from headaches to heartbreak. When stirred into wine, these mixtures promised relief from everything but skepticism. Superstition filled the spaces science could not reach. If illness struck suddenly, it was blamed on bad air, demons, or the gaze of an envious neighbour. Amulets were hung around the neck, bits of iron, tiny scrolls of scripture, or the foot of a hare unlucky enough to help others. A knight might ride into battle wearing a saint's relic, trusting that holiness could deflect arrows better than armour. One chronic fear of the late medieval era was the plague, which rolled through towns like a rumour with teeth. Physicians in dark robes covered their faces with simple cloth masks stuffed with herbs to purify the air. The sight alone was grim enough to silence laughter. People burned rosemary, carried poes, and whispered charms to ward off the pestilence. Some prayed, others fled, but no one escaped the smell of panic. Even the bells of churches took on a slower, mournful tone, their echoes counting losses no one dared record. For childbirth, advice was equally inventive. Women were told to grip relics during labour, preferably something touched by a saint or, failing that, a large spoon of silver. Midwives in linen caps muttered charms and tied knots in string to trap the pain. If the child lived, the knots were untied in gratitude. If not, they stayed tied forever. Noble women sometimes summoned astrologers with parchment star charts, ensuring the child's first breath aligned with the right constellation. Animals too were part of the medieval medicine cabinet. Goat's milk was thought to restore youth. A poultice of dove's dung could cure blindness, provided one's faith was stronger than one's sense of smell. Even unicorn horn powder was listed as a tonic, and if no unicorn could be found, narwhal tusk served admirably. Cats chased disease-bearing mice, though in some towns they were accused of causing the very illnesses they prevented. The Middle Ages had a complicated relationship with logic. Among the upper classes, astrology guided every remedy. A patient born under Mars might be bled differently from one born under Venus. Doctors carried inked star charts beside their scalpels, convinced the heavens signed every diagnosis. It was said that a wise man could heal by rearranging the stars on parchment, if only he wrote carefully enough. Urine too was treated with cosmic respect. Physicians examined it in glass vials held to sunlight, declaring diagnoses by colour and scent. Golden meant health. Green meant worry. Black meant confession. Despite the absurdity, compassion lived inside the confusion. People truly wanted to help one another survive. Herbalists in gardens, monks copying ancient texts, and travellers returning from distant lands shared one thing: hope. Each cure, however strange, was an act of faith, proof that humanity refused to surrender to the dark. As night returned to the stone halls of the manor, candles flickered over jars and bundles, over powders and prayers. A healer in wool robes murmured to his herbs as though they were old friends. Outside the air cooled, carrying the scent of rosemary and rain. Somewhere a bell tolled for another soul beyond saving. But inside, faith held fast, in the flame, in the bottle, in the dream that the Middle Ages could outsmart mortality, at least until morning. In the Middle Ages, health was not measured by charts or numbers, but by whether one could rise with the dawn bell. If you could work, you were well. If you could pray, you were blessed. Everything else was an inconvenience best ignored. Inside the stone cottages of the medieval countryside, medicine began at home. A mother crushed garlic in a wooden bowl, mixing it with honey, while whispering a charm taught by her grandmother. The sweet, sharp scent filled the air. Above the hearth, bunches of herbs hung from the beams, mint for the stomach, sage for the heart, nettles for nearly everything else. A farmer's wife tied coloured ribbons around each bundle so she could tell the cures apart in the dim light. Even a simple cough might send someone to the village wise woman, whose remedies were equal parts knowledge, faith, and rumour. The wise woman of a 14th century village carried no license, only a pouch of dried leaves and a lifetime of listening. She learned the language of plants the way others learned prayer. She knew when to harvest by the moon, when to burn rosemary to cleanse the air, and when to stay silent as the priest walked by. Some called her healer, others witch. In truth, she was the local scientist in an age without laboratories. Her cottage smelled of thyme and smoke, a place where fear and hope shared the same wooden table. At the manor, life was cleaner, but not always wiser. A nobleman's chamber shimmered with perfume and polished brass, yet even wealth could not buy certainty. Servants hung sprigs of lavender and thyme near windows to keep out evil vapours. Curtains were drawn tight against the night. To the medieval mind, darkness itself carried sickness. They lit candles to chase away the unseen. To us it seems superstition. To them it was logic built from generations of watching disease follow foul air. Meals were their own kind of medicine. Warm wine flavoured with cinnamon was thought to open the spirits. On fast days, peasants ate barley bread and onions, humble food said to balance the humours. The wealthy favoured roasted meats dusted with black pepper from distant ports, a spice so costly it was measured grain by grain. Physicians warned against fruit, claiming it spoiled the stomach, but no one refused a ripe apple when the orchard glowed gold at harvest. In the medieval kitchen, nourishment and ritual mingled. Every bite was a prayer for balance. Sleep was the final cure. Beds were narrow, stuffed with straw and herbs to ward off fleas. Curtains surrounded them like soft fortresses. People believed dreams could reveal illness or healing. A sudden nightmare meant bad humours rising to the head. A peaceful dream promised recovery. Families prayed before lying down, uncertain whether morning would come. The Middle Ages treated each dawn as a small resurrection, proof that faith still outweighed fear. Beyond the villages, monasteries became islands of learning. Monks in brown robes tended gardens of fennel, yarrow and rue, plants believed to carry fragments of divine mercy. In low stone rooms they copied old Greek texts, quills scratching softly beside candlelight. Travellers who fell ill on the road found the abbey doors open where a novice would bring warm bread and spiced wine. Records show these quiet healers saved lives simply by offering rest, cleanliness, and prayer, three luxuries the outside world rarely afforded. Back in the towns, market day medicine returned. Vendors shouted of miracle balms made from goose fat and salt. A medieval apothecary might display coloured bottles behind his stall, each glowing like jewels in the sun. He sold powdered shells for fevers, crushed berries for the blood, and sometimes a secret mixture that was mostly hope. Buyers nodded, coins changed hands, and another legend of healing was born. By candlelight, a country healer whispered to his herbs before grinding them into paste. He believed in them not because they always worked, but because they gave him something to offer when words failed. Hope was his most reliable ingredient, and hope, in an age of plague and prayer, remained the strongest medicine of all. At first light, the Middle Ages stirred awake. The sky turned from violet to pale gold, and the chill of the night thinned like mist over the fields. The bell of the parish church was the only clock most people ever heard. Its slow toll told them when to rise, when to eat, and when to pray. Time was not measured in minutes, but in chores, in prayers, in the soft rhythm of things that had to be done again tomorrow. In the medieval countryside, men and women worked by the rhythm of the land. Farmers shouldered wooden tools smoothed by generations of hands, the wood polished darker by sweat. Children carried baskets of seed, their bare feet damp with dew and soil. Cows lowed in the pastures, geese called from the riverbanks. Smoke drifted from cottages where porridge thickened on the hearth, and the smell of oats and wood ash meant the day had begun. The sun was a companion and a judge. Too much heat, and the crops might fail. Too little, and hunger would come before Christmas. Every village had its own voice. The clang of a blacksmith's hammer rang through narrow lanes, marking the heartbeat of the settlement. A baker lifted round loaves from the clay oven, marking each with a cross before setting them on the window ledge to cool. Children lingered nearby, hoping for crumbs. Goose quills scratched inside the manor hall as stewards counted grain and listed the debts of tenants on rolls of parchment. Even the monks in distant abbeys kept time by labour, copying texts, sweeping cloisters, chanting and tending gardens fragrant with rosemary, sage and rue. Work and prayer blended until neither could be told apart. The medieval farmer bowed to the earth as naturally as to God. Each furrow cut through the soil was a kind of prayer, steady, repetitive, humble, a dialogue between man and ground. When the sun climbed too high, people rested beneath hedges or low trees, sharing coarse bread and watered ale. There were no wages to count, only seasons to survive. And they measured wealth not in coins, but in healthy children and full granaries. Laughter sometimes carried across the fields, thin and bright, proof that even exhaustion could not silence the will to live. In the towns, the rhythm changed. Merchants rolled open their shutters and swept the thresholds clean. The market square filled slowly with colour, bolts of dyed cloth from Flanders, baskets of apples, jars of honey, pewter cups flashing in the sunlight. The smell of fish mingled with the sweetness of roasted nuts. A juggler or storyteller gathered a crowd near the fountain, earning pennies by laughter alone. Nearby, a scribe in ink-stained robes sold letters to those who could not write. He wrote slowly, shaping each word with reverence, as though language itself were a kind of healing. Knowledge was becoming its own currency. As afternoon lengthened, bells called the faithful to vespers. Tools were rinsed and stored. Work songs faded into quiet humming. Fires were coaxed alive for the evening meal. Onions, beans and barley simmering together into one shared pot. Children chased each other between doorways until dusk softened the air. Dogs curled beneath benches. Hens settled on their roosts. Voices lowered, first in laughter, then in prayer. Night fell gently over the late medieval world. A single candle on a rough-hewn table could light an entire room. Stories replaced labour, songs replaced orders. People spoke of saints and seasons, of lost friends, of storms that might come. Beyond the walls, the wind pressed against thatch and shutter, carrying the scent of smoke, damp wool and rain. Farther away, wolves cried in the forest, reminding the living how thin their safety truly was. In manor and hut alike, the same ritual ended the day. Hands were washed in cool water, candles were pinched out one by one. Families lay down on straw mattresses filled with herbs to keep the fleas away. Dreams belonged to no class. Rich and poor drifted into the same uncertain darkness. To the people of the Middle Ages, sleep was not escape but renewal, a silent vow that tomorrow the bell would ring again, and life would continue its endless sacred rhythm. Evening descended gently across the Middle Ages, as if the entire world had drawn a slow, deliberate breath. The light that had once spilled across the fields thinned to silver, painting furrows and thatched roofs with moonlight. Shadows lengthened over the hedgerows, and every sound, the bark of a dog, the creak of a cart, seemed amplified against the stillness. It was the hour when the medieval world let go of work and waited for rest. The bell of the parish church tolled once, low and hollow. Its echo wandered down the lanes and over the meadows until it reached the next village, where another answered in kind. To those living in the medieval times, this was how evening spoke, not with clocks, but with echoes. Darkness was never taken for granted. It was feared, respected, and welcomed all at once. People saw night not as an ending, but as a test of faith. the proof that hope could survive without the sun. Inside a medieval cottage, the day's warmth was gathered like treasure. A mother ladled stew into wooden bowls while her eldest brushed soot from the hearth. A father, his hand still rough from the fields, patched a broken strap by the fire's edge. Children leaned against one another, half listening to their parents' murmured talk of weather and neighbours. The air smelled of onion, smoke and damp wool. Somewhere outside a cartwheel squealed, then faded. It was the sound of the world finishing its sentence. In the narrow lanes of a medieval village, the last travellers quickened their steps toward the inn. A stable boy led a weary horse under a torch fixed to the wall, its flames sputtering in the wind. The innkeeper stirred his great pot of ale soup, humming softly, while the smell of yeast and sage drifted out into the dark. Across the valley, bells called monks to compline, their final prayers of the day. The notes floated over the fields like drifting lanterns, faint but steady. Even those who did not understand the Latin felt its comfort. Somewhere, holy voices kept watch while they slept. Beyond the village palisade, the countryside stretched wide and silent. A farmer stood at his threshold, his fields silvered with dew, and listened to the frogs calling by the stream. He thought of his children, of next week's weather, of debts and favours. A widow at the edge of town whispered a psalm by her window and touched a sprig of rosemary hanging above the sill. To the people of the Middle Ages, protection was built from gestures as small as these. Each movement, each prayer, was a shield against the unknown. In the market towns, evening had its own rhythm. Merchants shuttered their stalls, latching the wood against the chill. A juggler gathered his coins, a lute strummed somewhere down the alley, and the watchmen's torches began their slow patrol. They called the hour in unison, voices bouncing off the walls. 9 of the clock and all is well. The phrase was half hope, half spell. Candles burned in upper windows, flickering over ledgers and scraps of parchment. In one room, a scribe of the medieval times bent over his page, writing by oil lamp, the smell of ink sharp in the air. Each letter was drawn with care, a silent conversation between man and time. As the moon rose higher, the world quieted into layers of sound. The distant river murmured over stones. Dogs barked once, then slept. Somewhere a nightbird cried. Even the wind seemed to hesitate before passing through the fields. In this hour, the late medieval world felt endless and small at once, a universe contained within the glow of a single flame. Far beyond the walls, the forest held its own congregation. Leaves rustled like whispers of forgotten prayers. Travellers gathered close to their fires, tightening their cloaks, speaking softly so as not to wake the dark itself. They told stories of saints and spirits, of shining riders seen at crossroads, of voices calling from wells. To modern ears, superstition. To them, was truth shaped by caution. They believed every light kept burning pushed the darkness back a little further. In monasteries built of stone and silence, the monks of the Middle Ages completed their vigils. They extinguished the torches one by one until only the sanctuary lamp glowed. Somewhere, a lone brother finished copying a final line from an ancient text. He sanded the ink, closed the book, and paused before the candle, letting the warmth reach his fingers. Outside his window, frost had begun to crystallize on the glass, tiny stars forming, while the real ones burned above. Soon, the whole land was asleep. The fire in the cottage turned to embers, the tavern songs fell quiet, the roads lay empty but for the occasional fox. Across fields and rivers the same hush spread, touching the towers of manors and the thatch of peasants alike. In the medieval times, all hearts, rich and poor, beat under the same sky. Dreams drifted freely between them, unbothered by title or fortune. Before sleep, people whispered their final thanks. For bread, for family, for one more day granted. The Middle Ages were never gentle, but they rewarded endurance. A candle was snuffed, a door was barred, the house settled into stillness. Then came silence, the deep living silence of a world that trusted dawn would come. Above it all, the stars brightened, countless and cold. They watched the medieval world below, a patchwork of faith, fatigue and resilience, and for a few hours everything was forgiven. The land exhaled, and in that long breath humanity slept. Sleep drifted slowly across the Middle Ages, blanketing villages and manors alike. The final fires in the hearth sighed into embers, and the scent of smoke mingled with the chill of night. The medieval world, which had worked so hard beneath the sun, now surrendered itself to rest. In that silence, every living thing seemed to breathe together, man, beast and earth. Within the cottages of the medieval times, dreams began to stir. They came quietly like travellers entering through an unguarded gate. A shepherd dreamed of his flock glowing like stars across the hills. A young mother dreamed of a cradle rocking itself, watched by a kindly saint. To the people of the Middle Ages, such dreams were not accidents of sleep, but whispers from heaven or warnings from unseen forces. In the candle-lit chambers of a medieval manor, sleep carried its own importance. Nobles believed their dreams revealed favour or misfortune, omens of health, of fortune, of war. A knight who dreamed of a broken sword feared betrayal before battle. A lady who dreamed of a white dove saw it as a promise of love. Every symbol mattered. Every image was part of a hidden language the waking mind could only guess at. At dawn, priests and confessors were summoned to interpret them, weighing each vision as if it were evidence before a court. In the humble homes of the medieval countryside, the same reverence held true. A farmer might tell his family that he dreamed of rain falling on green wheat, a blessing, they said, from God himself. Children who dreamed of wild animals were marked with protection charms at morning prayer. A grandmother, recalling her youth, might mix herbs into warm milk and tell the dreamer to sip it slowly to soften the spirit. Dreams were medicine, and the soul's ailments were treated beside the body's. Before lying down, the people of the Middle Ages performed their nightly rituals. They crossed themselves, whispered verses, and hung sprigs of rosemary or iron keys above the bed. It was believed that open doors invited wandering spirits, so the latch was drawn and the shutters barred tight. A candle was left burning low, not for light, but to show faith that no darkness was absolute. In the medieval times, sleep was not taken lightly. It was a journey few understood, but all must take. In monasteries, the discipline of rest was woven into devotion. The monks of the Middle Ages lay in narrow cots, robes folded with care, their dreams steeped in scripture. They saw stairways of light, gardens untouched by season, faces of angels singing in endless harmony. Yet even among the holy, dreams could wander. Some confessed to visions of wandering forests or oceans without shores. The abbot would listen, nod, and remind them that the mind too seeks pilgrimage. Scholars of the medieval world argued endlessly about what dreams truly were. Some said they were vapours rising from the stomach to the brain, shaped by the moon's influence. Others believed they were fragments of the divine, messages sent through layers of sleep to guide the faithful. Astrologers mapped the stars above sleepers' heads, hoping to chart the routes their souls might travel. No theory could capture the mystery, and perhaps that was why the Middle Ages valued dreams so deeply. In the towns, under roofs of timber and tile, the people of the late medieval times slept uneasily. Merchants dreamt of ships lost at sea, then awoke with sudden resolve to offer alms. Apprentices dreamed of finishing their masterpieces and awoke to redouble their effort. Even in slumber, ambition worked like a heartbeat. Night was not escape from life, but a mirror that reflected it more truthfully. As the night deepened, imagination loosened its boundaries. The sleeper could be both pauper and king, saint and wanderer. Dreams in the Middle Ages dissolved rank, language, and distance. A peasant might find himself feasting beside emperors, a noble might toil joyfully in the fields. All were equal beneath the moon. Sometimes nightmares pressed close. Demons crouched on chests, storms tore through dream villages. The dreamer might wake in sweat, whispering a prayer to St. Michael, or clutching a wooden cross. And yet even fear had purpose. The medieval times believed that every terror endured in dreams was a sin forgiven in sleep. Beyond the walls of man, nature dreamed as well. The forests murmured in the wind, rivers shimmered beneath starlight. Owls called, wolves answered, and far above, the constellations traced stories older than scripture. Each star was said to guard a soul, keeping its vigil until morning returned. And so through the long hours the Middle Ages slept, not peacefully, but faithfully. Every dream was a sermon, every breath a small prayer. For a few short hours, hunger, plague and war ceased to matter. Only the shared rhythm of hearts remained, beating softly beneath the same ancient sky. When dawn finally stirred beyond the hills, the dreamers would wake, some remembering, most forgetting, but all changed, however quietly, by what the night had shown them. Morning unfolded slowly across the Middle Ages, like a psalm murmured to life. The first breath of light touched the horizon, revealing the silhouettes of trees and spires half hidden by mist. Dew clung to every blade of grass, each droplet a tiny mirror catching the awakening sky. For a moment, the medieval world seemed to hover between sleeping and waking, unsure which to choose. The last echoes of night slipped away, an owl's cry, a final crackle from dying embers, the sigh of thatched roofs releasing the cold. Then came the answering sounds of day, a rooster's call, the clatter of a pail, the faint laughter of a child who had already forgotten the dreams of darkness. The people of the Middle Ages rose without ceremony. Dawn was not spectacle but necessity. To wake was to survive another turn of the earth, and survival itself was holy. Inside a medieval cottage, the mother knelt by the hearth, coaxing the coals back from their sleep. Her breath stirred sparks that leapt like fireflies, then settled into a patient flame. The smell of wood smoke, yeast and wet wool mingled in the room. A small pot simmered quietly, yesterday's bread steeped into morning broth. The children stirred, their hair haloed by light spilling through the shutter's gap. Outside, a thin fog wound through the yard, curling around the legs of a waiting dog. This was how most lives in the medieval times began, not with words, but with motion. Beyond the cottages, the field shimmered with frost. Farmers stooped to test the soil, hands bare to the cold. The ground was stiff but faithful. It would soften soon under the sun's slow mercy. Each furrow held yesterday's labour and tomorrow's hope. The farmer crossed himself, whispering thanks for the simple miracle of light returning. He was no philosopher, yet he knew that every dawn was grace. From the monastery, the first bells broke the stillness. Their tones rolled down the valley like ripples across a pond. The monks of the Middle Ages moved through dim corridors in silence, robes brushing stone. They gathered in the chapel beneath stained glass windows that caught the pale gold of sunrise. Their chant rose, low, steady, ancient, a sound that belonged as much to the wind as to men. Outside, birds answered with their own hymns, and for a few moments heaven and earth shared the same rhythm. In towns and cities, the awakening came later but louder. Shopkeepers unbarred their doors, apprentices swept thresholds still damp with dew. The aroma of baking bread drifted through narrow streets, followed by the metallic ring of a blacksmith striking his first spark. A cart rattled over cobblestones, its driver whistling a tune half remembered from childhood. The late medieval world turned from darkness to light, and commerce to prayer, all in the fan of an hour. Every sound was a declaration: we endure. Inside one stone house, a merchant traced numbers into a ledger while his wife poured water for washing. Through the open window came the hum of market stalls being raised, the laughter of gossip starting anew. Life was fragile but relentless, no season, no fear could still it for long. To the people of the Middle Ages, continuity itself was comfort, the idea that the world would always wake again, even if they did not. By mid-morning the fog lifted, revealing green hills and the silver thread of the river winding toward the sea. Children chased hens across the yard. Dogs barked at shadows and sunlight alike. Women carried baskets of linen to the stream, their reflections flickering in the ripples. The wind smelled of grass, bread, and chimney ash, the scent of the medieval times renewing itself. The hardships of plague, hunger, and toil still waited at the edge of every life, yet for now they were distant, powerless beneath the gentle tyranny of light. Within the manors, nobles sat at long tables near high windows, sipping warm ale and speaking softly. Servants laid platters of fruit and cheese, tapestries swayed with the draught of opening doors. Even the wealthy seemed subdued in this hour. The night stillness lingered, reminding them that status was small beneath the immensity of the morning sky. For one brief hour before decisions and decrees, they were simply people grateful to be alive. Farther along the roads, travellers stirred their fires and packed their bundles. The wheels of wagons groaned as they rolled forward, leaving trails of steam where dew met sun. Each mile ahead was uncertain, yet the light behind was enough to believe in. In the medieval world, courage did not roar. It whispered, again. As the day matured, the land itself seemed to exhale. The bells that had closed the night now rang for work and worship. Smoke rose in thin white threads from countless hearths, binding villages and valleys in invisible prayer. Somewhere a monk bent over parchment, dipping his quill into fresh ink. He wrote carefully and without hurry, "The light returns. God keeps his promise." and then he smiled, not for glory but for certainty. Because in the Middle Ages, goodness was measured not by wealth or triumph, but by rhythm, the return of dawn, the persistence of breath, the humble acceptance of another day. Every sunrise was a covenant renewed between the earth and those who worked it. The world did not ask for joy, only endurance, and in endurance it found peace. As the sun climbed toward its noonday height, the medieval times stood fully awake. Villages bustled, rivers flashed, banners lifted above market squares. The hardships of night dissolved like mist into memory. History, patient and eternal, turned another page. And somewhere in that turning, unnoticed yet miraculous, the human spirit rose with the morning light, faithful, weary, and still willing to begin again. By mid-morning, the Middle Ages were fully awake. The hush of dawn had lifted, replaced by the low hum of life itself. Smoke curled from chimney pots in long ribbons that drifted lazily above the thatched rooftops. Dogs barked from distant courtyards, and the air trembled faintly with the sound of bells from neighbouring parishes, answering one another across the hills. The world had slipped quietly from prayer into purpose. In every medieval village, labour began with the same certainty as sunrise. The wheelwright tested his spokes with a careful tap of his hammer, listening for flaws in the wood. The blacksmith's forge hissed like a living thing, sparks skipping across the packed earth floor. Women drew water from wells, their laughter carrying over the clatter of buckets. Children chased one another between drying lines and hens, weaving games through the rhythm of chores. Work and play were never far apart. Both were ways of being alive. Fields stretched outward, in patient order. Farmers bent their backs to the plough, boots sinking into damp soil that smelled of iron and spring. Oxen snorted in the traces. Ravens followed close behind, picking at the newly turned ground. The sun was high enough to warm the shoulders, but kind enough not to scorch. In the medieval world, time was measured by shadow and sweat. The steady creak of wooden yokes, the rhythmic strike of hoes, the rustle of grain, all became part of the land's heartbeat. The marketplace bloomed like a garden of noise. Vendors called their wares in half a dozen tongues: English, French, Latin, and dialects born somewhere in between. Fishmongers laid rows of silver-scaled catch over crushed herbs to hide the smell. Cloth merchants unfurled bolts of wool dyed in indigo, crimson, and the pale green of meadow grass. The air shimmered with spice, pepper, nutmeg, saffron for the wealthy, and the faint sweetness of honey for the rest. Coins rang on wooden tables, dogs begged, and arguments were settled with a shrug and a handshake. The Middle Ages were rough, but they were rarely dull. Inside the monastery the rhythm was slower, more deliberate. The monks of the Middle Ages moved through corridors lined with script and silence. Their ink-stained fingers worked steadily across parchment, copying texts so ancient that no one remembered the hands that first wrote them. Between prayers they tended herb gardens, sage for digestion, lavender for calm, mint to flavour the poor man's wine. They listened to the bees, learning patience from the hum. To the monks, the garden and the book were the same lesson. All things required tending. In castle kitchens, heat shimmered like water. Servants hurried between hearths, their faces bright with effort and sweat. Copper pots gleamed, ladles clanged, and somewhere a hound barked impatiently, hoping for scraps. The air smelled of roasted fowl, onions, and rosemary. Cooks argued cheerfully while scullions scoured plates in basins of cloudy water. Every movement had a place, every task a rhythm. The castle's grandeur depended on 1,000 unseen hands. Beyond the walls, the world moved at the pace of feet and hooves. Pilgrims trudged the long roads toward holy shrines, rosaries clicking softly in their fingers. Merchants guided their wagons from town to town, wheels carving grooves in the mud that would outlast them. At the crossroads stood stone shrines, rough-hewn statues wrapped in ribbons, or crowned with flowers left by travellers. Some left coins for safe passage, others left prayers folded in leaves. The medieval times were an age of faith on the move, weary, dusty, but devoted. By afternoon, sunlight turned golden and thick. It spilled across fields of barley and wheat, glinting on the edges of scythes. Farmers sang to keep their strokes in rhythm, voices low and even, carried away by wind. Children gathered wildflowers near the hedgerows, weaving them into crowns for no one in particular. The smell of cut grass, smoke and sweat hung in the air, the perfume of an honest day. Somewhere a stream murmured over stones, a sound older than any prayer. In the towns, artisans carved saints and beasts from oak and limewood. Potters spun wheels that hummed softly beneath their palms. Tailors stitched coloured thread through fine linen, gossiping about the weather and the price of sheep. The Middle Ages were not without art. Beauty was simply folded into duty. A doorframe carved with vines, a spoon polished until it caught the sun, small testaments to the human need to make even necessity graceful. As the afternoon deepened, the air grew warm and still. Shadows lengthened across the lanes, stretching toward the churchyard walls. The Angelus bell sounded, a brief pause in the long breath of labour. Tools were set down, caps were doffed, and a shared silence passed between workers who knew the words by heart. A prayer for gratitude, a prayer for endurance. Then the rhythm resumed, steady as before, quieter now, touched with weariness and peace. Inside the taverns, the first mugs were filled. Ale foamed over wooden rims, hands slapped shoulders in greeting. Minstrels tuned their lutes by the fire while travellers traded stories of distant abbeys, strange storms at sea, rumours of kings and wars none had seen. The laughter was low, the music soft, even joy in the medieval world kept a respectful volume. In the narrow lanes outside, candles glowed in the windows of cottages. Children carried rushlights to the loft. Mothers folded cloth. Fathers leaned on doorframes watching the last light drain from the sky. The air cooled, smelling faintly of hearth smoke and baked earth. Somewhere far away, a wolf howled, and a farmer's dog answered from behind his fence. The Middle Ages settled back into their familiar balance, half toil, half prayer, held together by faith and fatigue. As twilight came, the bells rang once more, softer now, their echoes weaving through the darkening streets. The smoke that rose at dawn now drifted homeward, blurring with the evening haze. Doors closed, shutters latched, and fires brightened against the coming dark. The day's rhythm slowed, but it never stopped. It merely shifted to the quieter pulse of rest. Tomorrow the same sequence would unfold again, the turning of wheels, the tolling of bells, the patient labour of survival. And so the medieval times carried on, not in glory but in persistence. Each sunrise began a prayer, each sunset sealed it, and somewhere between the two humanity found its peace, in work, in song, in the steady grace of repetition. Evening drifted softly across the Middle Ages, a slow hush falling over roofs and fields. The day exhaled its final warmth. The sky deepened from blue to indigo. Far off, a single bell marked the hour, and the sound rolled through valleys like water over stone. Fires crackled to life, their smoke rising in long grey ribbons that disappeared into the cooling air. The light did not vanish, it mellowed, turning everything it touched to bronze. Villagers moved in gentle procession toward rest. A farmer led his oxen home, patting their flanks as they breathed clouds into the dusk. The miller stopped his wheel, letting the river hum on without resistance. Women rinsed clay bowls in wooden tubs, steam curling up around their faces. Children lingered near doorways, reluctant to let go of the last games of daylight. The medieval world shifted from motion to memory, each sound fading like a candle burning low. Inside a medieval cottage, supper was modest but hard-earned. Barley stew simmered near the hearth. A loaf of coarse bread sat beside it, edges crisp from the day's oven. A jug of weak ale passed from hand to hand. Conversation was spare but contented, a few murmured hopes about weather and harvest, a small joke about a neighbour's stubborn goat. Outside, a rooster, confused by firelight, called once more before quieting for good. In the manor halls, servants gathered the remnants of the feast. Platters clanged, dogs waited patiently for scraps, and musicians played soft airs that echoed off the stone. Candles flickered in high sconces, spilling light down tapestries that told stories no one truly remembered. The lord leaned back in his chair, eyes heavy. The lady counted the hours until dawn through the glass of her wine. Even wealth was powerless against weariness. The monks of the Middle Ages ended their long day at Compline. Voices rose unhurried, carrying through arches and across courtyards washed in torchlight. When the final Amen fell, the abbey sighed into silence. One monk lingered in the scriptorium, quill suspended above ink, afraid to blot the page. Another closed a heavy door, listening to its echo until it faded. In the garden, dew had already formed upon the leaves. It glimmered like quiet prayer. They would sleep on straw and wood, wrapped in wool, trusting obedience more than comfort. Beyond the abbey walls, taverns glowed like embers. Laughter spilled into the lanes, mixed with the clink of mugs and the scrape of stools across dirt floors. A minstrel sang about a knight who lost his horse but kept his pride, and everyone laughed, though no one believed the tale. At another table, travellers compared the price of salt in 3 different kingdoms and agreed that all kings overcharged. The air smelled of ale, wax, and humanity, a mingling of everything fragile and enduring. Out in the countryside, the roads emptied. Pilgrims huddled under hedges, their cloaks damp with evening mist. Merchants rolled blankets around their shoulders and dozed beside wagons. The glow of towns shimmered faintly on the horizon, like a promise. Crickets began their song, joined by frogs in nearby pools. The medieval times seemed to hum beneath the stars, as if the earth itself whispered to those still awake. Within cottages, firelight flickered on low beams and faces turned soft with fatigue. Mothers tucked blankets tight around their children. Fathers muttered blessings in half-remembered Latin. Many sat upright to rest, the strange custom that defined an age. It looked uncomfortable, but it comforted them. They feared the stillness of lying flat, believing it too close to death's posture. So they dreamed sitting up, half awake, half alive, waiting for dawn to prove they still belong to the world. In distant towers, scribes worked by candlelight long after others slept. Ink darkened on parchment as they copied words they could scarcely read. Somewhere among those lines were fragments of medicine, prayer and superstition, all woven together, the anatomy of faith itself. Outside, the night pressed its palm against the glass. The flame shivered, but held. The stars climbed higher. They were the one luxury everyone shared. From field to fortress, the constellations stitched the sky with slow precision. Farmers read omens in their brightness. Scholars drew diagrams no one else understood. The heavens were the great book no monk could finish copying. Near midnight, the world grew stiller than silence. A single cart rolled over stones far away, a reminder that time never sleeps completely. The river carried faint reflections of starlight, its surface smooth as ink. Owls drifted between trees, wings whispering like robes in a corridor. The air was cold now, sharp enough to clear the mind. This was the hour when the Middle Ages seemed eternal, when even the weary believed the world might stay suspended forever in its breath. In that quiet, dreams took hold. A blacksmith dreamed of sparks that turned to fireflies. A mother dreamed of her son returning safely from war. A monk dreamed of the sea, though he had never seen it. And perhaps somewhere a noble dreamed of sleeping flat at last, just to know what freedom felt like. The night deepened, layer upon layer, until it felt almost solid. The torches in the streets guttered, shutters closed against the cold. The laughter of taverns dulled to murmurs, then to memory. What remained was the rhythm, the pulse of the medieval world breathing in unison. Work and prayer, fear and faith all blending into a harmony older than words. The stars kept their posts, the wind softened to nothing, and the sleepers, upright in their narrow beds, slightly toward tomorrow. The Middle Ages had earned their rest, though they never quite surrendered to it. The world waited with them, poised between motion and mercy. The night had taken the medieval world completely now. It pressed gently on rooftops and rivers, folding every hill and hearth beneath its weightless hand. Darkness spread not as a shadow but as a tide, patient, inevitable, and kind. Each star glowed like an ember left over from creation itself. The air held a faint sweetness, half smoke, half rain. It was the scent of quiet itself. In distant valleys, rivers moved unseen, their surfaces ink black, their voices soft and endless. Mist clung to their edges like memory. Every ripple carried moonlight in thin, silver threads that unravelled as they travelled. The world was not asleep, it was dreaming, and within that dream, everything slowed to the rhythm of a heartbeat heard from far away. Owls drifted between branches without stirring a leaf. A lone horse shifted in its stall, exhaling steam into the cold. In the silence, even small sounds felt holy. A door settling, a coal sighing, frost creeping across glass. This was the language of the Middle Ages at rest. Inside cottages, families sat in that ancient upright posture, heads bowed, hands folded loosely. The youngest breathed in shallow rhythms, dreaming of light. The elders sat half awake, watching the embers fade. Between them hung the sound of the fire, not crackling now, but murmuring like a voice trying not to wake anyone. No one feared the dark tonight. It had become something gentle, like an old friend who asked for nothing but company. The monasteries too had fallen into perfect stillness. Cloisters silvered with moonlight, shadows tracing arches like flowing ink. A lone monk walked the corridors barefoot, feeling the chill of the flagstones through the thin leather of his sandals. He carried no candle. He did not need one. The stars shone through the windows high above, and their light was steady enough to read by, if one's reading was prayer. Outside the walls, forests rolled in slow waves of black and blue. Wind brushed the tops of trees and whispered down into the hollows. Deer stood motionless in the frost, listening to something older than time. Wolves padded along the frozen streams, eyes catching stray fragments of starlight. The medieval night belonged to them too, not to fear but to balance. In the dark, every living thing found its rightful pace. Farther west, the sea lay unseen but never absent. Its breath reached the land in soft gusts that smelled faintly of salt and distance. Fishermen sleeping on distant shores turned in their dreams, hearing waves that weren't there. Somewhere a gull cried once, then vanished, leaving silence so deep it seemed to echo. In the market towns, stalls slept beneath tarps rimmed with frost. Wood creaked softly, ropes groaned. A sign swayed above a closed door. Cats owned the streets now, their eyes twin lanterns in the dark. They walked paths humans had forgotten, roof to roof, wall to wall, across the bones of the day. Beneath their paws, the stones still held a faint warmth from the vanished sun. The sky itself changed texture as the hours passed. At first, it was ink, thick and still. Then a faint shimmer appeared along the horizon, not dawn, but starlight, catching the thin breath of clouds. The Middle Ages had no clocks precise enough to measure this moment, yet everyone sensed it. That turning of the world when night deepened before it eased. Within the castles, guards dozed against cold stone walls. Torches burned low, dripping wax onto the floor like time melting. Somewhere deep in the hall, a tapestry stirred slightly in a draught, as if the woven figures were breathing. Even the high towers surrendered their vigilance. No danger dared disturb a night this calm. The moon began her slow descent, drawing the light down with her. The stars, still bright, seemed to lean closer, as though watching over the sleeping earth. Their reflections shimmered in wells and ponds, a second sky inverted and trembling. To the people of the medieval times, this mirrored world was proof of heaven's nearness. They believed angels travelled on the glimmer between water and air. Perhaps they were right. In the last hours before dawn, frost grew thick on every surface. Cartwheels, tools, the handles of doors, all glittered faintly as if dusted with powdered moon. The breath of animals hung motionless in the air. No one moved. The entire world balanced on the edge of stillness. Somewhere a shepherd woke and looked out from his hut. He saw nothing but the faintest grey on the rim of the horizon. For a moment he thought the sun was rising, but it was only the world catching its breath. He smiled, turned back, and slept again. In every home dreams deepened. Children wandered through fields of stars, women dreamed of gardens that bloomed without labour. Men dreamed of rivers flowing uphill, carrying their burdens back to the source. No dream was strange enough to disturb the peace. All were fragments of the same great sleep that held the world together. Above it all, the Milky Way spread wider, a river of light too slow to hear, too vast to end. Every point of brightness was a reminder that life, even in its silence, never stopped moving. If there were gods watching, they were kind enough to stay quiet. By the time dawn crept closer, the dark had grown softer, not lighter. The stars did not fade, they merely stepped back, allowing the horizon to breathe again. The first colour of morning leapt into the corners of the sky. It touched rooftops, the tips of trees, the faces of sleepers who did not yet stir. Even the upright dreamers remained still, their bodies remembering what the soul already knew, that peace does not come from waking, but from resting. One by one the stars blinked out, like candles extinguished by invisible hands. The moon lowered behind the hills, her light dissolving into mist. The rivers brightened, the frost began to weep. Somewhere a bell rope trembled in its tower, sensing its duty soon to come. But not yet. The night had earned one last breath. And so it lingered. A long exhale stretched across the land. The Middle Ages slept on, unwilling to rise too soon. Every soul, from peasant to prince, floated in the same gentle dark, unaware that morning had already begun its work. The stars still turned above them, patient and eternal. And if one could stand outside time and look down upon that sleeping world, peer as a single pulse, one vast, slow heartbeat glowing faintly beneath the skin of night, the sound would be steady, soft, and endless. The kind of sound that never stops, even when no one is left to hear it. The night had held the world, and in doing so had taught it how to rest. When dawn finally broke, it would not wake the dreamers all at once. It would let them rise gently, carrying the stillness of starlight within them, a quiet promise that every ending is only another breath between darkness and dawn. And when the viewer drifts past this point, eyes closed, breath slow, the story continues without words. The screen dims, the sound softens, and the same stars that watch the Middle Ages keep their vigil for us. The night does not end, it turns the page.